What's up, guys? Justin here with TheSketchUpEssentials.com. So in today's video, we're continuing our beginner series in SketchUp by learning how to use the array function and advanced copy features inside of SketchUp. Let's go ahead and just jump into it. I know this probably feels like kind of a weird thing to focus on, but you use this so much, you really need to understand how these functions work. And so if you've worked with other programs, one of the things you've probably done a lot of is you've probably done a bunch of copying and pasting to create copies. So say that I wanted another one of these, you're probably used to doing a Control-C and a Control-V in order to create a copy. While that is a valid way of creating copies inside of SketchUp, it's not necessarily the way that you want to do this for a couple different reasons. And so let's go ahead and let's start by drawing a 2-foot by 2-foot rectangle. So I'm just going to tap the R key, single click, and then draw 2-foot, 2-foot, or type 2-foot, 2-foot, and then we're going to pull this up by 2 feet. So we've basically got a cube inside of our 3D space. Now, one thing to be aware of when you're creating copies is remember that depending on what you have selected, that's what's going to be copied in your SketchUp model. So in this situation, if I was to copy just this top surface, notice how I get just the face in here. And so what we want to do is for this exercise, we want to start by selecting the whole thing, right-clicking on it and making it a group. That's just going to make it so that we're getting the whole object when we work with it, rather than the individual parts and pieces, which you can still get to by double-clicking on the object or get out of by single-clicking out of the object. But when you create copies inside of SketchUp, what you actually want to do most of the time is you want to use the Move tool. And so the way that the Move tool works is you select an object, you can tap the M key in order to activate it, and then you set a base point, right? So whatever that point is where you click on this object is going to be the first point of the move. Well, one thing a lot of people don't understand or don't know about is if you look down here at the bottom, there's a function that says Control equals copy. So what that means is when you have the Move tool active, if you tap the Control key, this is going to create a copy of the object that you're working with rather than moving the object that you had selected. So again, select this, tap M, single click, move your mouse, and tap the Control key like this. Now this is going to move this is going to work the same way that the Move tool does, in the sense that say I wanted to move this 10 feet from this point to this point right here. Well, I'm just going to type in a value of 10 feet and hit the Enter key. That's going to create a copy that's going to be 10 feet from here to here. And so you can do this with as many objects as you want. So this is too far apart. So let's say I was to take this object and I'm just going to use the Move tool in copy mode and create a copy maybe 3 feet away right here. Well, now let's say that I wanted to create copies of both of these that were 3 feet in this direction. Well, what we would do is we would select both of these objects, activate the Move tool by tapping the M key and single click, and then I'm going to tap Control on my keyboard. And in this case, I'm going to type in a value of 3 feet and hit the Enter key. So that created a copy that's 3 feet from this point to this point. And note that these copies are being created based on whatever that base point is that you're setting. So say that I was to use my default model right here, and say that I wanted to place this so that the bottom of Bonnie's foot is in the middle of an object. Well, what I would do is the same thing where I would pick that point, single click, and move my mouse. But again, you're going to tap the Control key in order to create that copy right here. And then I can just move my mouse, find the midpoint, and I can click and create that copy right here. And now this object is placed based on that central point in here like this. Now, one thing that's super powerful about this is remember that your base point doesn't have to be on your object. So let's say that I had a line over here and I wanted to create a copy of this object that's aligned with the endpoint right here. Well, what I could do is I could tap the M key. And so what I could do in this case is I could tap the M key and notice how I can set a base point that's off of the object. Well, if I tap the Control key with this active, notice how that's going to create a copy that's aligned with this point over here, like this. So creating copies with the Move tool is way more precise than just doing a copy paste, because you get control over that base point and that final point. And so depending on how you want to move this, you might vary your base point. So what that means is that right now what we've been doing is we've been using this end and moving this over. Well, the problem is if we move this over, this isn't actually aligned with that line, right? So say that we wanted to align the end of this shape with this line right here. Well, instead of picking this as our base point, we would pick this as our base point. Then we would tap the control key. I'm just going to hold the shift key to lock this red axis, and then I'm going to move this over here. Well, notice how now this is aligning that end base point with this line right here. So now we're aligned where each one of these starts and ends on the end of this edge like this. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about a feature that a lot of people don't know about that makes this 10 times more powerful. And so what that is let's say that we wanted to create multiple copies of this box, right? And say that we wanted them to be, I don't know, 36 inches on center. Well, what you could do is you could use the move tool in copy mode, right? Single click, tap control, and then you could type in 36 inches. Then you could tap control again, do this 36 inches. You could just keep doing this over and over again. And that's fine, but it's kind of time consuming, right? It's a whole bunch of extra work in order to do that. Well, what you can do instead is you can use what's known as an array. So what an array does is it creates multiple copies of an object at once. So the way that you can do that, and the sequencing is a little weird when you first try this. So you need to pay a whole bunch of attention to your sequencing. But if I take this object, tap the M key, and then create a copy, right? So I'm just going to tap control, then I'm going to move this 36 inches and hit the enter key. Well, once I've done that, if you type in X or star and a number of copies, and note that I've not clicked on anything else, right? I just placed this object right here. If I type in star 4 and hit the enter key, what that's going to do is that's going to create 4 equally spaced copies with the spacing that we had in here, right? So each one of these is going to be equally spaced. Well, notice how I still haven't clicked on anything, right? This is still active because you can see it in the corner. Well, if you type in star 6 and hit the enter key, that's going to create 6 equally spaced copies like this. So you can use this in order to create arrays of objects really quickly. And I can do this as many times as I want. I can type in ×2, ×4, ×8, ×5, and I'm hitting the enter key each time. But notice how as long as I don't click off of this tool, I can change the number of copies I have in here. But as soon as I click off the tool, notice how that no longer works. Now, I want you to pay attention to the sequence here. So I'm just going to create another copy over here. So if it's not working for you, do exactly what I say, which is tap the M key, single click on the corner, tap control, and you're going to move your mouse or type in a value. So in this case, I'm just going to click right here. I have not clicked again, right? I don't have to click in the box or anything like that. All I've done is I've placed this one copy, and then type star 3 and hit the enter key. And that's going to create your copies like this. If you do anything out of sequence on that, it's probably not going to work. So just be aware of that. And so let's say that we were to bring in a model from the 3D warehouse. So let's say we were to bring in a clay pot model. So just pick something right here. Doesn't really matter which one you pick. Let's say we're to pick this clay pot right here and bring it in. You can pick anything, but I'm going to place this like this. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to align it with this edge. And you could just put it on the edge if you wanted to do that. So what we've talked about up to this point is this gives you the ability to create a multiplication array, meaning it's going to add copies based on your spacing that you set. However, you can also use the / key and a value in order to divide or create copies between points right here. So I'm going to select this object, single click, move my mouse, and I'm going to tap the control key. And I don't know why that went away. We'll just do it again. Tap the control key right here. I'm just going to move my mouse until it gets to this endpoint like this. And I'm going to single click. And again, not doing anything else with this. I've not clicked again. If I type in a / and a 5, that'll create 5 equally spaced copies between this point and this point. I can type in divided by 4, divided by 10, divided by 100, divided by 15. It works exactly the same way as the multiplication tool, only this creates equally spaced copies between points, like this. And so where this gets really valuable is you can start creating arrays really quickly. So I could create a copy here, times 5, and then I could select this and do the same thing, use the move tool in copy mode, times 5, select this, use the move tool in copy mode, times 5. So this is a really fast way to create a ton of copies at once inside of SketchUp. Okay, and so we've talked a little bit about the move tool. Another thing I want you to know is about the rotate tool. And so the rotate tool is a tool for rotating objects in SketchUp. So you can activate it either by clicking on the rotate tool right here or by tapping the Q key on your keyboard. This one's a little bit weird in the sense that you can create copies, but you have to set the direction that it's going to rotate first. So when I activate this tool, remember that you can do the left, right, or up arrow keys in order to lock a direction, or you can also mouse over a face and it'll try to align to that face in order to let you rotate the object. But this works the same way that the move tool does. So in this case though, what you need to do, and I'm going to tap the up arrow key in order to lock this to the blue direction, you can single click in order to set a base point. Well, in this case, now you need to set a reference point. So if I click on this corner right here, notice how I've set a reference point, and then you either type in a value. So say you wanted this to be 45 degrees, you could type in 45 and hit the enter key, or you can just click in order to set that rotation. But notice what it does is it lets you set that base point, the reference point, and then the final point. So if you wanted this object to rotate in this direction, what you could do is you could mouse over this face in order to get it to align. And you can hold the shift key in order to lock that until you set your base point. But then if I click, notice how this is going to allow me to rotate in this direction right here. Now, one of the cool things about this tool is it also allows you to rotate objects without ever clicking on the object itself. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on this circle I just drew and click on Find Center. But notice how if I activate the rotate tool and I mouse over this face, or if I tap the up arrow key, I can set a base point that's off of the object like this. So then I can move my mouse and I can click and I can rotate an object around a radius based on that separate base point right here. So that by itself is really interesting, but what's really interesting about that is the rotate tool has the same array functions as the move tool. So if I do the same thing, right, I set a base point right here and I move my mouse, if I tap the control key, notice how I can create a copy along an arc. So in this case, I'm going to type in a value of, we'll say 30 degrees. So I'm going to type in 30 and hit the enter key. Well, now if I type in star and a number of copies, so I'm going to say star 10 right here, or star 11 and hit the enter key, that's going to create equally spaced copies along that same arc or along that same number of degrees that you rotated this object along. So you can also use this to create copies between points. So if I tap control and single click, then I move my mouse over here and say we typed in a value of 125 degrees, and then I type in /5 and hit the enter key, or /10, it's going to create equally spaced copies along that arc right here, like this. So you can use this in order to create rotational copies as well. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about one of the things that a lot of people don't know about that can be vitally important for keeping your model organized. And so we're going to start by creating a couple different shapes. So I'm going to start by drawing another cube. So we'll say it's 3 feet, 3 feet. We'll pull this up 3 feet to create the cube. And I'm going to take this object, I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to make it a group. We're also going to use the circle tool, and we'll draw an 18-inch radius, and we'll pull this up right here. We're going to select this object, and we're going to make it a group. We'll do the same thing with a cone. So we'll do 18 inches, and in this case, we're actually going to use the follow me function in order to create our cone. So we're going to draw a line up like this. We'll draw a line to the corner, and basically what I've done is I've created a face that I'm going to extrude along this surface. So I'm just going to select this surface, I'm going to activate this Follow Me tool, and I'm going to click in order to extrude that in the circle, like this. And you can go ahead and draw an edge across the bottom in order to fill it in, and then you can erase this. So just tap the E key and click and drag across it in order to erase it. So now I've got 3 different kinds of objects, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to group all 3 of them. And so what we've done up to this point is we've just kind of used these as individual objects. Well, what I want to do is I want to show you a tool you can use in order to keep all of these objects organized inside of your model that can be massively valuable. So this tool is called the outliner. And what the outliner does is it basically allows you to see visually all of the objects in your model. Now note that these are only groups in here. None of these are things like lines or edges. Only groups show up in here, and components and section planes, but like edges and faces are not ever going to show up in the outliner. But notice how when I select an object over here, it also gets selected in the outliner like this. Well, in this case, let's get a little bit more organized. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this group, which is my cone, and I'm going to rename it to cone right here. And I can do the same thing with my cylinder. I can do the same thing with my cube right here. Whoops. I don't want to filter. I want to rename cube right here. So notice how now those 3 objects show up above. And I've got a bunch of like leftover geometry in here from the other examples. Don't worry too much about that for right now. Notice how if I click on my cone, my cube, or my cylinder, those all get selected in here. Well, now notice if I create a copy of this cylinder. So I'm going to create a copy that's 10 feet out. I'm going to type in times, then 5 right here. Well, notice how now there's 6 cylinders in this model, like this, and each one of them shows up when I click on it. Well, notice how if I select all of these, right-click on them, and put them in a group, that's going to create a group that all of those cylinders are in, and you can see this over here. Well, if I right-click on this, I can rename this cylinders, like this, and now I have a group of cylinders. I can also use the move tool in copy mode. I'm just going to create a copy that aligns here, then type in times 5. I can take all of these cones, make them a group, or we're going to rename this cones. Then I'll do the same thing over here with my cubes, like this. So if I take this, select it, make this a group, we can call this cubes. Well, now notice how I have groups within groups, but I can minimize all of them, right? This allows me to keep my model organized, but it also lets us do things like tagging groups, which we'll talk about in a minute. But now notice how if I was to take all 3 of these and select them, I could put these in a group and I could call it shapes, like this. So what this does is this gives us a visual way to organize things in our model. And we talk a lot more about this in the course because we use it a lot for our layout type modeling, doors, frames, other things like that. But this gives me the ability to double click in here and see the different cones. And I can double click on one and just edit a cone without having to like click, 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 click in order to get in here. I can just pick one of the cubes and I can edit it right here. Now, let's say that we were to delete these cubes and we were to take this cube. And so let's say that we were to right click on this one and we're going to make it a component. And we want to make sure that we check the box for replace selection with component. Notice how a component looks different in here than a group. So the groups have 1 box, the components have 4 boxes in here. But now let's say that I was to make copies of this component right here. We're going to type in times 5 and hit the enter key. Notice how those cubes have brackets around them indicating that they're components. Well, now if I double click in here and I make a change to one of those cubes, notice how all of those cubes are going to change in here because they're instances of that component. So what this does is this gives us the ability to quickly access different parts and pieces of our model and keep everything organized. We could also go into our tags section. So tags are going to set visibilities of objects. So your outliner sets your organization of objects. Your tags set your abilities. Now you can toggle things on and off using little eyes in here like this. I don't usually recommend that. I usually recommend creating a tag for each one of these. So in this case, I would create a cubes tag, a cylinders tag, and a cones tag. Well, notice how I can click on these groups and then I can use the drop down either in my entity info or at the top of my page if you right click and select the option for tags, and I can tag these. So I'm going to tag my cones with cones, my cylinders with cylinders, and my boxes or my cubes with cubes. Well, what that means is that now I can go into my tags section and I can toggle each one of those off. And what I did is I tagged the entire group that those are in rather than the individual objects. So that's just kind of a basic organizational thing. Well, now if I add additional cubes in here, right? So say that I added like 50 more cubes. So say times, we'll just say 20 right here. Well, now all of those cubes are inside of the cubes group. And so if I toggle the cubes group off like this, they're still all going to toggle on and off like this. So the outliner is really important for keeping your models organized. And so another thing I might do in a situation like this is just to keep everything organized again, because I've got a million groups in here, right? But if I was to take these, I could put these all in groups and I could label them. So rotation, example, arrays, example, copies, example. And then I could take each one of them and I could minimize them like this. Well, notice how now my model is very organized and it's really easy to access these different things. So if I want to get into my arrays example, I can click in here, or this is my shapes example, but you can see how I can see exactly which groups are in here, just like this. So it makes managing your model significantly easier. So that should give you a pretty good idea of how to create copies of objects inside of SketchUp. So in the next video, we're going to kind of put this all together and we're going to start creating example models. So make sure that you're subscribed and that you're checking this playlist so that you can follow along with that. If you do want some more help learning how to use SketchUp, I do have a step-by-step course, which I'll link to on this page, where you can get access to me. We have live calls. I have a ton of great training in there to really help you take your SketchUp to the next level. So I'd love to help you learn SketchUp in that way as well. But as always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.